Li Fei insists CE candidates can only be nominated by a committee. A possible change in vaccination against pneumococcal infection, and a new air defense identification zone over the East China Sea.
Hello and a very good evening. Basic Law Committee Chairman Li Fei wrapped up his three-day visit to Hong Kong today. Speaking at a news conference before his departure, he insisted that under the Basic Law, only the future nominating committee will be able to nominate candidates in the 2017 chief executive election. And he believes Hong Kong people will not choose a chief executive who will work against the central government. Evelyn Leung has our top story tonight.
Will there be civic nominations in the 2017 chief executive election? Who will be eligible to run in the election? These were the questions that many people wanted to ask Li Fei during his three-day trip here. Answering questions from the press before concluding his visit, the Basic Law Committee chairman failed to reveal anything more than what he had said in his speeches over the last few days. Li said candidates in the 2017 CE election must be nominated by what the Basic Law calls a broadly representative nominating committee. He said under Article 45 of the Basic Law, the nominating power does not lie with individual members of the committee, but with the committee as an institution. On who is eligible to run in the election, Li stressed the person must be trusted by Beijing, accepted by local citizens, and is capable of governing the city as stated in the Basic Law. He said he firmly believes Hong Kong people will choose a person who can meet these criteria. When asked how Beijing would react if a person who's against the central government won the election, Li called this question very imaginative and said he believes this will not happen. The Basic Law Committee chairman also stressed there has to be a right number of candidates to ensure there is a competitive election. But as to how many, he said this is a matter that has to be further discussed. The Basic Law Committee chairman thanked Hong Kong people for allowing him the chance to explain how universal suffrage should be implemented and carried out, as well as clarifying certain misinterpretations on the issue. He hopes there will be more opportunities in the future to come to Hong Kong and communicate with the people here. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
Li's remarks have sparked a lot of debate on what it means for the next chief executive election. While pro-Beijing politicians say Li has clarified a lot of doubts, the pan-Democrats are questioning whether his visit has helped at all. One of the key points of contention, that chief executive candidates have to love the country, love Hong Kong, and not oppose the central government, is a legal requirement rather than a political one, has raised many eyebrows. Speaking to TVB News today, Democratic Party chairwoman Emily Lau says Beijing needs to give Hong Kong space to come up with a consensus on election reform.
Some of their people from the pro-Beijing camp have said that it can't be written in the legislation. And now these people have to come out and apologize and say they got it wrong because now Beijing has spoken, so it can be written in our laws. How humiliating. If that's the way we do things, you keep humiliating the Hong Kong people, Hong Kong government, pro-Beijing politicians and others. How can we have a consensus?
But Lau disagreed with the view that there's no point in discussing the matter further. She thinks it's all the more important that the SAR and central governments hear what Hong Kong people have to say about the matter. That's why the government's election reform consultation document, to be unveiled next month, is so important.
Well, people will look at that and see, are you really putting all the restrictions? So there are so many no-go areas, so any real discussion is meaningless. Or are you saying, don't worry, we really want to listen to all views and we are eager to engage all parties.
She also said if civic nominations cannot be allowed, her party is open to other nomination methods, as long as candidates of different political views can be chosen. But radical lawmaker Leung Kwok Hung said everyone should continue fighting for nominations by the general public.
I think Occupy Central is a must now. And apart from that, I think we should repeat what happened in the 2010, the legislators should be signed in order to create de facto referendum.
But Basic Law Committee member Albert Chen reiterated that Hong Kong's mini-constitution specifies there is only one way candidates can be nominated, and that is through a nomination committee, not through civic nominations. The Secretary for Food and Health says a committee will look into whether the government needs to change its vaccination program following the recent deaths of 2 children from pneumococcal infection. It will hold the meeting as soon as next month. Rachel Leung reports.
Secretary for Food and Health Ko Weng-man says he's concerned about the 2 cases of invasive pneumococcal infections which occurred within the space of a week this month. He says the government could change its vaccination program to counter the threat.
In this regard, the expert committee on vaccination program under the Center for Health Protection will have a meeting, and in fact has advanced its meeting to early December. And the expert therein will then analyze the available clinical and epidemiological data, as well as considering the supply of the new vaccines.
Up until now, only the new pneumococcal conjugate vaccine 13, also known as PCV13, is able to suppress the deadly pathogen. But the 3-year-old boy who died last Sunday had only gotten PCV7 and PCV10 jabs. The government started providing free PCV13 vaccinations to children last year. But children born before 2012 have only received PCV7 and PCV10 jabs. There are still about 34,000 children in Hong Kong who have not been given the PCV13 vaccination. Experts say those who have been vaccinated with 7 and 10 have a higher chance of becoming infected with a more powerful serotype or subtype of pathogen. It's recommended that those who have had their PCV7 and PCV10 shots be given a dose of PCV13 to boost their immunity against all 13 serotypes.
Among those children who've been vaccinated with PCV7, the 7-valent vaccine or the 10-valent vaccine. Now, these vaccines are very effective in suppressing the growth of those specific serotypes. What happens is you suppress those 10 or 7 serotypes. The other, what we call very virulent serotypes, like serotype 3 and serotype 19A, and they are causing the more severe disease that we are encountering in this region.
Dr. Wang recommends parents to take their children to one specific doctor instead of different ones because that might cause children to undergo different treatments, which can make matters worse. Rachel Lang, TVB News.
Japan has lodged a serious protest after a move by China to establish an air defense identification zone in the East China Sea. It's the latest development in a fierce dispute between the 2 countries over a contested chain of islands. As James Aiken reports, the move appears certain to escalate territorial tensions even further.
The statement by China's Ministry of National Defense included a map of what it calls the East China Sea Air Defense Identification Zone. That zone contains a set of islands known as the Diaoyus in China and the Senkakus in Japan. It overlaps with a zone already established by Japan, which also includes the same islands. The statement adds that planes in the airspace above the islands must now report flight plans, maintain communications, and respond to identification inquiries. Beijing says that aircraft failing to follow the rules are subject to emergency military measures. The rules went into effect this morning. China's defense ministry calls the zone a necessary measure in exercising its self-defense right and says the rules follow practices of other nations in protecting their coastlines. In response, Japan has lodged a serious protest with the Chinese government over the move. The ministry's Junichi Ihara said the action is extremely dangerous and could trigger unpredictable events. On Friday, the Japanese Coast Guard said 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships were spotted in the disputed waters. In September, Japan said it would shoot down unmanned aircraft in Japanese airspace after an unmanned Chinese drone flew near the islands. Widespread protests erupted in China last year after the Japanese government purchased 3 of the disputed islands from a private Japanese owner. James Aiken, TVB News.
The death toll from yesterday's oil pipeline explosions in the port city of Qingdao in Shandong province has gone up to 47. More than 130 others were injured. The owner of the pipeline, Sinopec, issued a public apology this morning. Firefighters kept working in the early hours today in the aftermath of the blasts. According to Sinopec, an underground pipeline that's been in use for 27 years in the Huangdao district began leaking oil at around 3 a.m. yesterday. Explosions occurred about 7 hours later as workers were repairing the ruptured pipeline. The blast ripped slabs of pavement, overturned vehicles and shattered windows in nearby buildings. Authorities say the oil seeped into underground utility pipes, which could have triggered the blasts. A mixture of gas and oil from a storm sewer exploded and caught fire over the sea. More than 3,000 square meters of sea surface was contaminated. Authorities are using contaminant booms to stop the oil from spreading.
Turning overseas now, Latvian police have opened a criminal investigation into the collapse of a supermarket roof that killed at least 51 people. As rescue workers continue to sift through the rubble, speculation on the cause of the disaster is focused on a garden and a playground that were being installed on the roof. The mayor of Riga suggested that large bags of construction material and soil may have been left on a weak spot. It had rained for days prior to the disaster on Thursday, possibly weighing down the soil, causing the roof to collapse. It had been an award-winning building, vaunted as a place where residents could step out of their homes and go for a stroll through a shady garden on their way to pick up groceries. Well, Americans paused on Friday to honor President John F. Kennedy 50 years after his assassination. In Dallas, thousands gathered in Daley Plaza where he was shot while riding in a motorcade through the city. Alan Buckner reports.
Kennedy was remembered as a transcendent leader of a rising nation, a man who created the Peace Corps, spoke of putting country before self, and challenged the country to go to the moon.
Hope and hatred collided right here in Dallas. We watched the nightmarish reality that in our front yard, our president had been taken from us. We were all very young, and given the nature of youth, we all felt invincible. Well, it seems that we all grew up that day.
A plaque was unveiled inscribed with the last lines of an undelivered speech and read out by the Dallas mayor.
We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny rather than choice the watchmen on the walls of world freedom.
The bitter rain and cold didn't deter the thousands who attended.
Now, I was 9 years old at the time this happened, and then 50 years later, I'm able to be here and reminisce the whole thing all over again.
He's one of the reasons why I wanted to be a science teacher and studied so much on space and everything, because of growing up with him saying we were going to the moon.
And there were tributes around the world. In Ireland, they laid a wreath at the John F. Kennedy Memorial Park. And in England, Kennedy's granddaughter, Tatiana Schlossberg, laid a wreath at his official UK memorial site, close to where King John sealed the Magna Carta, the founding charter of civil liberties, in 1215.
I know my grandfather would be both proud and humbled to see that his work on behalf of peace and liberty for all people is remembered in the very place where the rule of law was made manifest nearly 800 years ago.
50 years after his death, John F. Kennedy remains one of America's most beloved leaders. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
And still ahead on the news tonight. South Korea marks the 3rd anniversary of a military strike by the North. Security preparations ahead of a regional forum on the upcoming CE policy speech. And growing traffic problems on a trunk route in Sha Tin.